Welcome, everyone, to the October 9th version of Wednesday with Walton and Newberry, brought to you here via video at thecardinalnation.com and audio at the Scoop Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. Hello, Blake.
Hey Brian, how's it going?
Doing fine, thank you. We've had now a little over a week, I guess 9 days, to sort of start to internalize and consider the ramifications of the major end-of-season press conference that the St. Louis Cardinals held. There's been one announcement that's happened since then, or a non-announcement, I guess, in that the contract of hitting coach Turner Ward was up at the end of this year, and the team has said that will not be renewed, so he won't be back. If they were going to let Turner Ward go, which is certainly understandable given the struggles of the offense, why didn't they take a shot at trying to do that during the season? Is it because they don't eat contracts, or, I know he was very close with Goldschmidt, but, maybe Goldschmidt could have used a jolt. I don't know. Maybe I'm second guessing here, but it seems like, they kind of waited until it was too late.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if they were just going to let him go at the end of the season, like you might as well just get rid of him during the season, see if that provides a jolt, if a new voice can maybe help some guys hit better down the stretch and see if you can actually make your way into the playoffs. I think the Cardinals, being the patient organization that they tend to be, probably just wanted to like give him the chance to finish out the season and turn things around. Obviously, it didn't happen. I think a lot of fans, myself included, were frustrated by the hitting this year and the lack of progress that was shown. And I think there was definitely ample cause to fire him as opposed to not extending his contract. But ultimately, the Cardinals eventually, I think, got the decision right by just not bringing him back next year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, Turner Ward followed Jeff Albert, who's now in charge of hitting instruction for the minor leagues for the New York Mets. But the offense, under Turner Ward actually, digressed. And, it looks like we're at the end of the Goldschmidt Arenado era in St. Louis, at least one of them, and who knows, maybe even both. But, the Cardinals didn't win even one playoff game during their time here, which is almost impossible to fathom.
Yeah, I realized that towards the end of the season, and I had to like double check and triple check that was actually the case because it just doesn't feel like that should be the case, but it's crazy that it was.
Now, it'll be interesting to see how they replace Ward. There may be, one or two other changes. It doesn't sound like they're going to be big changes on the major league staff, but 2025 is now set up for this year as this year of transition, where Chaim Bloom will become the new president of baseball operations at the end of this coming season. If he changes a manager, and we don't know, but if the team has another down year, Marmol's probably going to be on thin ice. If the Cardinals turn around, maybe not. But there's a risk that there could be a new manager in 2025. And would a hitting coach would a name brand, a big name hire hitting coach, come into that kind of uncertainty, or will the Cardinals, look internal to get a guy who would be happy to have the job for 1 year? A lot of times when you bring in people from outside, they want more certainty if they're going to move their family or do whatever it is. And when I say more certainty, I mean a longer term contract than just one season.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a really interesting point that you made. And I almost wonder if the Cardinals' announcement of Chaim Bloom taking over next is actually going to help them in this regard, because they've kind of mentioned that Mozeliak is still the GM, the president of baseball operations. He will be making the decisions, but decisions that have a longer term impact will also involve Bloom. So I would think the hiring of a hitting coach would categorize itself as a move that would have a longer term impact. So I would imagine Bloom has a seat at the table at the very least and a voice on who the Cardinals actually bring in. So I think if that is the case, there's a chance that he could provide assurances, some level of certainty that he believes in who's being hired, that he will be there regardless of who the manager is in the following year. Obviously not a clear-cut situation. Any coaches still may just want to avoid that if they're a bigger name with more interest elsewhere. But I do think that there is a chance that won't hinder the Cardinals as much as we might think.
That's a great point, Blake, and I hadn't really considered that, but you're right. Whoever comes in is going to have the Bloom seal of approval. And so that's a very fair point. It'll be interesting to see, how long the Cardinals wait to make that announcement, or whether they, will wait and announce their whole staffs and all. We'll just have to see. One of the first indications, though, of what we heard in that press conference, meaning a down payroll, is going to come, shortly after 5 days after the World Series, when the Cardinals have to make a decision on whether they exercise the options for Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson. And that's, 23, 24, whatever it is, $1 million next year. It's a big nut. What do you think the Cardinals will do with those two guys?
Based on what the Cardinals have said, with next year being call it what you want, a retool of sorts, I cannot imagine they pick up either of those options. I think Lance Lynn, especially, I really don't see an avenue towards him being on the team next year. Kyle Gibson pitched a little bit better. Maybe he will be. He was healthier over the course of the year. Like you think maybe there's a chance, but I think if the Cardinals are really going to retool and shed payroll, this is an easy way to shed payroll. You can give more starts to Andre Palante and Michael McGreevy. Maybe Steven Matz gets healthy, but you're probably stuck with that contract anyways. So if you're going to be stuck with it, like we'll see what they do. But I wouldn't be shocked if he started that in the rotation. My point is, I think there are names that are internal that can fill those roles, and potentially somebody cheaper on the market if the Cardinals want to go that route.
Now, I get where you're coming from, and that does make a lot of sense. There's also talk, though, that Sonny Gray could be made available. He of the $30 million commitment next year. And, that's obviously a way to also save a lot of money in one place. But if you let 3 veteran starting pitchers go, you're definitely going to be more exposed. So it'll be interesting to see. They're probably not going to get to end a job on Sonny Gray before they have to make the decision on Lynn and Gibson.
Yeah, and I guess that's actually a great point. And this could give us a little bit of light on potentially what the Cardinals are planning with Sonny Gray based on what they do on these decisions. Because as of right now, if I'm the Cardinals and I'm holding on to Sonny Gray, I'm probably not picking up either of these options. But if I'm aggressively trying to move Sonny Gray or even listening to offers on Sonny Gray, I'm probably picking up Kyle Gibson at least.
Yeah,
So
and so that'll be an interesting tell, I think. And you mentioned Michaelis and Matz. I think a lot of fans would like to get rid of them because they're underperformers, but they have big contracts, and it's hard to see from a financial perspective the Cardinals paying enough of their salaries to rid themselves of them, realizing that they're probably going to have to go and spend some money to hire somebody to replace them. Because, if you really only have Fedde and Palante when you're done, how do you fill the rest of the rotation?
yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like it would be nice if the Cardinals could shed guys salaries from guys like Michaelis and Matz, but they would actually have to pitch well for teams to be interested in having them on the team for that kind of a price. So I think honestly, when I look at the rotation, right now Sonny Gray's at the top, obviously. That obviously changes if he gets traded, but then you have Eric Fedde, you have Andre Palante, you have Michaelis and Matz, and you have Michael McGreevy who look good down the stretch. Like if the Cardinals do want to go towards something of a transition year, they have guys that they can pencil into the rotation. Obviously, that's not like a intimidating rotation by any means. But if the Cardinals are planning on shedding salary and reloading, that's one way they could do it while still potentially creating an opportunity for some of the younger guys below them to really not have too many guys to push out of the rotation.
I want to look back because there's been a lot of talk about how the Cardinals want to be more like Milwaukee. That Milwaukee has kind of surpassed the Cardinals in terms of their view of analytics and their ability to get more out of a relatively moderate payroll in the scheme of Major League Baseball. I went back and looked, and as folks probably know, Gibson and Lynn together cost the Cardinals $24 million this year, and the goal was certainty, right? The goal was get innings. Between them, they made 53 starts, and they delivered 2.8 FWAR, Fangraph WAR. The Brewers, on the other hand, coming into this year, lost their 2 best starting pitchers, right? Woodruff was hurt, and they traded Corbin Burns because he was approaching free agency. So they had some huge holes to fill. They got Colin Ray and Tobias Myers off the scrap heap for $5.25 million. Those 2 guys together delivered 3.1 FWAR compared to 2.8 for Lynn and Gibson. So 3.1 FWAR for $5 million. The 2 of those 2 guys together, Ray and Myers, made 52 starts. Lynn and Gibson made 53. So again, I don't think anybody would say that the Lynn and Gibson decisions were bad decisions, but the Cardinals spent a lot of money to get that certainty, whereas another organization in their own backyard that beat them by 10 games in the standings, spent basically 1/5 what they did on their 2 rotation openings and got better return. Why? Is it better scouting? Is it better metrics to identify these guys? Is it better coaching to say, hey, maybe, you need to throw this pitch more or move to that side of the rubber, or what is it?
I think it's probably just a variety of all of those things. And I think when you look at this, like you obviously, there's a talent evaluation perspective. You have to be able to look at a pitcher and say, he does this really well. this not so well. Maybe we should ask him to do more of this. But then you actually have to have the coaches who are able to help him realize, one, that he should be doing more of what he's good at, and two, help him actually do whatever that is. And I think that there's a talent evaluation and there's a coaching aspect that goes into that. But also, when you just look at like the state of the system, I know we're talking about free agents that guys brought in, but if the Cardinals had guys in AAA or who were younger and perhaps a little more ready to be in a major league rotation and had a talent profile that profiled well in a major league rotation, they wouldn't have had to go shell out as much money as they did on those two guys. They could have potentially just taken a chance on some internal guys, given them that opportunity, and then actually seen them probably pitch at a similar level for a fraction of the cost.
And maybe spend a little bit of that money on offense instead. But
Yeah.
But that, that's hindsight. But I will say, and part of it is my age, and part of it is, remembering the Cardinals Hall of Fame induction that was held back in August. I mean, think back to the days of Dave Duncan. I mean, he would find that Kent Bottenfields and Kyle Loesch's and dozens of other guys that were kind of mediocre, middling guys, and all of a sudden he made them above average major league starters. And for whatever reason, that magic just hasn't been there.
Yeah, it hasn't. And I think it almost goes back to, the Cardinals' renewed investment, commitment to whatever you want to call it, to infrastructure and coaching. It feels like to me that is probably the difference. And I think that has declined pretty heavily over the last like 10 to 15 years. So hopefully the Cardinals can get back to that. But then there's also just a certain level of brain power that is required to, again, identify those guys and coach them correctly to actually get that return on investment.
Yeah, let's talk about player development, because that was, of course, the main focus, at least our main focus, being prospect watchers as we are. Sort of the next major move, it seems like, for Chaim Bloom is to hire a new farm director. And it's, it was stated that he's already working on that, but it's not clear exactly when that's going to be, where that person's going to come from, what their background will be. But if that's the first shoe to drop, that should be also very, very interesting in terms of showing where, what direction Bloom's going to go.
Yeah, it will be. And I mean, Bloom comes from something of an analytical background. He's definitely a player development guy. That's what he was with the Rays. I would not be shocked if he hired somebody who kind of fit into both of those molds. I also wouldn't be shocked if he, used some of his connections in the past with the Red Sox and the Rays, and maybe has a guy who he thinks is ready to take a step up into that role, or maybe is out of work or in a different role that he could reposition into a head of player development role at the Cardinals. We saw his influence, I would assume, on the roster last year when he brought in the Cardinals, we'll say, brought in a bunch of players who were under Bloom at a certain point in their career. I would not be shocked if they went down a similar path with bringing in a player development or a head of player development that Bloom has already worked with.
Here's another thing I've been thinking about in that vein. Normally, and I don't know if this is necessarily the same for front office people in terms of the duration of their contracts, but I know minor league coaches, typically October is the month where a lot of shuffling is occurring. Guys are coming off their contracts. Organizations are saying, hey, Joe Smith, I want you back next year, or no, your services aren't desired. And teams are trying to kind of figure out who's available and who they want to fill these jobs in the month of October. Now, with no farm director, number one, who's going to make those hires for next year? And number two, is it going to be Bloom, or are they going to gamble and sit on the fence? And the risk of sitting on the fence and not making the hires is organizations don't let guys move laterally typically. It would have to be like what you said, a clear promotion. And when you're talking about a hitting coach in Double-A, I mean, if the guy's a hitting coach in High-A, it's probably not a big promotion. And so I guess what I'm saying the long-winded way is Bloom, in order to impact the staffs for 2025, if he's going to try to get coaches from existing organizations versus going to hire somebody from Driveline or wherever, he's got to move fast.
Yeah, he does. And I do think if Bloom is going to be hiring a head of play development, obviously that head of play development we would expect to be relatively aligned with how Bloom thinks. So I do think if there's not a head of play development in place and Bloom is making those hires, that whoever is brought in is not going to have any kind of like a large systemic issue with the moves that were made. So I think it's fine if the Cardinals go down that route. I don't think it's necessarily great if they decide to just sit on the fence, as you said earlier, and just let a lot of these guys slip through the cracks.
Yeah, it would be interesting to watch again to see, what happens. And, it was very interesting at the end of the press conference, which was pretty well canned. And I mean, there were Q&A, but, still fairly high level. Mozeliak stayed around and talked to the media afterward, and folks were able to ask more detailed questions. Bloom didn't. And it's a shame because, there's a lot of questions about this. And, I get that maybe they want to give him some time to, get things sorted out before he goes into detail. But, this 8 to 12% increase in budget that's going to go to player development. I mean, the $64,000 question is, what's the base? 8 to 12% more of what? And where's the money going to go? Is it going to go to people? Is it going to go to tools? Is it going to facilities? Some combination of all those things.
Yeah, I mean, 8 to 12% of a player development budget. I mean, I guess it depends on how the Cardinals define player development budget and what is fitting into that. But I can't imagine that would be the same thing as like 8 to 12% of your player payroll. Like
No
the
way. No
is
way.
significantly higher, I would think. So if the Cardinals really are going to that basically they don't have to cut costs by that much to be at the same like salary level that they were at next year. So the follow-up question on that too then is how far are we going to like how much money are we going to try to save next year? Because in order to make up 8 to 12% of player payroll, like you probably just decline the option of Lance Lynn, you're there.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, obviously you got guys like Sonny Gray whose contracts are getting bigger, but it would be interesting to know kind of what the base is for some of these buckets they're pulling from.
The other questions that I'm anxious to ask Bloom whenever I can get to him is,
Yeah.
how will this affect international? We've talked a little bit before. I've written about the details of the struggles they've had in getting prospects out of the Dominican Republic Academy. The fact that the Florida Complex League team has finished in 5th place like 5 years in a row. They've got some real work to do at the nuts and bolts level of the organization. And so, is international going to be part of Bloom's purview? And what about scouting? I mean, scouting is more and more, scouting meaning leading up to the draft, is much more a metrics analytics process than it ever was before. Yeah, the scouts are still there, but is Bloom going to get his fingers in that too, or is Randy Flores, going to keep on doing his thing as he's done it?
I would imagine Bloom is going to get his fingers into it. That's, of course, just purely my own hypothesis, but I think Bloom had basically the entire year this year to assess the state of the organization, where things stand. And I think if he's going to be somebody who's in charge of leading this organization into the future, and also with a heavy kind of emphasis on player development this year, it feels like he should be really the guy who's kind of revamping that international system and maybe having a little bit of say in the draft, although obviously Randy Flores is still the person there. But I would be shocked.
But remember, a year from now, Bloom's going to be Flores' boss, assuming they're all still here.
Exactly. So I would be shocked if we did not see Bloom exert his influence in those realms over the course of the year.
Should be fun to watch. So we were sort of in a different approach. Didn't spend a lot of time talking about players, although by this time next week, the Arizona Fall League will have a full week under its belt. The Glendale Desert Dogs got underway on Tuesday, played their first game. However, none of the Cardinals were in the starting lineup, and at least through the 5th or 6th inning, I noticed that nobody had pitched yet. But we will be able to see Thomas Sajaci and Bernal and some of the others the first week of their results in the desert. And you can swing by the Cardinal Nation each morning and check the results from the previous day's Arizona Fall League action. And we'll, of course, as always, focus on the results of the Cardinals that are suiting up down there under manager Ben Johnson, who's, of course, Memphis's manager, but he is now managing Glendale here in the Fall League. So with that, we will conclude the October 9th version of Wednesday with Walton and Newberry. Blake, thank you for your insights as always, and we'll talk to everyone next week.